Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. I'm here by myself. I've got a couple topics. I'm going to have to click around because I've got notes. Today, I'm going into something related to CELTA again. There's going to be a lot of CELTA comments or episodes and everything related to CELTA and teacher training because that's kind of the direction that my career is going now, which is very exciting. So I've transitioned into more of I'm doing CELTAs all the time. I'm doing teacher training all the time. And that's actually really great for me because that's what I love. But that means that some of this content is going to be focused lots on things for people considering CELTA, things for people who are just getting out of CELTA, things for more experienced teachers because I'm doing some teacher training modules and other programs. So yeah, it's going to be lots of teacher training stuff, so get ready. Today, there was, hang on, let me just find my little notes here because otherwise it's going to be a bit of a disaster. Okay, here we go. So today I wanted to talk about, well, actually, I read an article that Sandy Millin, if you don't know who Sandy is, great professional. Lots of content, super interesting stuff. So if you're a teacher, you don't know who Sandy Millin is, I very much recommend that you go onto her blog. Yes, she is a blogger and she does it very well. And she's friends with James Taylor, who I've had on the show before. And he told me that Sandy's kind of a rock star because she will write blogs while she's watching things. She can has that ability where she can be absorbing information and reacting to it and writing blogs. She's kind of a rock star. Anyways, so she, like myself, I think she is doing some CELTAs. She's training some teachers. That's kind of her, I don't know exactly what she's doing right at this moment, but this has been in her past. So she posted something, this was 5 years ago. So it was right in the beginning of the pandemic when people were taking CELTAs. And she has I can put the link in the notes here, but she has a blog post that mistakes that trainees make in CELTA TP, which is the teaching practice. Now, I agree with 99% of what Sandy says, but this one I found something that we don't agree on. So I always find that to be an interesting point to start with. So she she has these points of things like mistakes, right? Spend 10 minutes lecturing students about grammar. Yep, absolutely. While we are language teachers, we sometimes have the misconception of being the sage on the stage, the wise person in the classroom, and you need to impart all of this wisdom to the students. And that's not necessarily true. You need to do that in a very dynamic, communicative, and creative way so that the students can understand, absorb, and hopefully use some of the language that you're introducing. But lecturing, not necessarily what we need to do. And actually, this weekend, I had to give a demo lesson for some CELTEs who are starting up their course in Mexico. And one of the trainees, candidates, teachers, we were going through feedback, and so I asked them, so what's your opinion, what you just saw? Not that I'm honestly CELTA tutors have to give demo lessons. It's always a little odd because I think that I'm not sure how I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure how I feel about this process in CELTA. I've thought about it a little bit because when CELTA candidates come into the program, a lot of them have the misconception of I am going to be able to deliver a perfect lesson. This is the first one misconception. I'll get back to Sandy's comments here, I promise. So there's no perfect lesson, doesn't exist. There is appropriate and effective depending on who you're teaching, but what's appropriate and effective for some students is not appropriate and effective for other students. Second, if the first thing that the CELTA candidates see is their tutors teaching demo lessons to the students, this sets a precedence. Whether we want it to or not, it does set a precedent. So I've always been slightly uncomfortable doing it, not because I'm not confident in myself as a teacher, not because I don't know how to handle a classroom. I know how to teach. I've been teaching for years. It's fine. However, many candidates come into the program thinking that there is a quote unquote correct way to do things. And when they're given one model, which happens to be my model when they come into my classroom, they think that that is Cambridge's definition of the perfect class. And a perfect class doesn't exist. So one mistake, that we can go back to this article, one mistake is assuming that how your tutor teaches is exactly what you need to emulate, which is not necessarily true. There's techniques that we're trying to teach you. There's staging and logical sequencing that you need to be able to do during the course. But the style, the dynamic, the way that you interact with students, of course, we try to build rapport with them, and of course, we try to be comfortable with them. But everybody builds that rapport differently. So if you try to be me, it's just going to come off as false, and I don't know how students are going to react to that. The reason that I say this is because one of the students, or one of the CELTA candidates this weekend, she goes, "You looked like you were really having fun." I was like, yeah, I have a lot of fun teaching. If I didn't have fun teaching, I shouldn't be a teacher. I actually genuinely enjoy being in the classroom. And if you don't enjoy being in the classroom, hanging out with students, just kind of, feeling your way through lesson plans and helping people get what they're supposed to get out of lessons, if you're not interested in doing that, I'm just going to throw it out there that you probably shouldn't be a teacher. I genuinely have fun in the language classroom. Always. Perhaps I'm also a goofball, but okay. So back to Sandy. So 10 minutes lecturing students about grammar. Yeah, I agree. We're there to interact. We're there to be humans. Like it's a weird dynamic. It's probably because it's something that we've experienced from some of our our own learning experiences, right? Okay. Then she says, read every question from a comprehension exercise aloud before you start the activity. And then she goes into it. Sandy, here's the thing. She's an experienced teacher trainer. She knows what she's talking about. I agree with her on this. It's okay, we don't need to do that. Sometimes does it help for people to understand? Yes, but can they read it quietly? Yeah. One of the things that I'm getting from her article is that there are no set rules. And this is something that CELTA candidates often confuse, that you have to do it exactly like this. Well, not necessarily. If you're using a technique, then yeah, if you're back chaining to help with someone's pronunciation, then yeah, you should back chain properly. And then there's kind of set rules. But in terms of setting up tasks, instructions, the way that we do things, and there's no right or wrong necessarily, and at least if you've made considerations. Well, I know that typically we do it this way, but I chose to modify it because this group of students or a particular pair of students always have issues. Okay, then fine. If you can justify it, then you can do a lot of stuff and a lot of modifications in the classroom. So yeah, we agree there. Drill all the answers. Again, I understand what she's going for here is drilling the correct answers, because when we do that, and she mentions this here in her part, in her post too, is that then we're focused on if it's right or wrong and not why and how we got there. So if we're doing receptive skills activities, comprehension activities, and we're only focused on, is it right or wrong? Are you right or wrong? Well, so we should be when we're setting up the activities, specifically for receptive skills, we should orient the students with some strategies on how they can then perform this task. depending on whatever the task is, you know? And then when we're getting answers from people, we should be asking why. What did you hear? What did you read? Where is it? How did you interpret this word, this phrase, this section? Those are the things that are actually more important. I mean, getting the correct answers is important too, but if they don't get the correct answers, not making them feel bad about it and figuring out what went wrong. So the next time they do a speaking or a reading or a writing or listening activity, you can kind of guide them in the right way so they can get the proper answers. Teachers must be in complete control of everything the students say and do throughout the lesson. Yeah. Please don't micromanage students. Yeah. Okay, so I know that TTT has been vilified because everybody's like, TTT is bad, reduce your TTT. Teachers shouldn't be talking. Okay, but here's the thing. Teachers are models in classrooms. So who's going to give a proper model? Who's going to clarify language? Who's going to set up tasks? Teachers need to talk. It's the unnecessary TTT that gets out of control and you start micromanaging everything, and instead of it's unnecessary. So you got to listen, TTT is not the enemy. Unnecessary TTT is. Figure out when and why you need to talk in the classroom. But don't be a micromanager. It's weird. My tea's getting cold. We're going to have to wrap this up soon. Okay. But the one thing that I disagreed with her on, and I'm going to read the part of it so that it's I think a matter of perspective too. So present all vocabulary items separately before students do their first vocabulary exercise. This might feel like you're being helpful, but it removes all the challenge from the vocabulary exercise, generally takes a long time, and reduces the opportunities for students to struggle a little bit, make mistakes, and get feedback, where the real learning happens. If we're not struggling, we're not learning. I agree with how she starts the explanation. Instead, let students have a go at the exercise first. If they work alone, give them a chance to compare in pairs before you check their answers with them. Yeah. Lowering the affected filter, agree. Make sure you've analyzed the meaning, form, pronunciation of all the words in your lesson plan just in case, but you don't need to go over all of them with the students, only the problem words. This is where we start disagreeing on some things. Even better, let the students work in pairs to do the exercises. That way, they can support each other with the questions they find challenging and learn from each other. Agree with that point. You can also hear them pronouncing the words. When monitoring during the activity, you can identify which words you need to check meaning of more carefully and which ones you need to drill. This might mean this might mean you go from looking at the meaning, form, pronunciation of 8 words to the meaning of 2, the pronunciation of 4, and checking the spelling of the other 2 problem words. As you can imagine, this will take a lot less time, and students will be more engaged because it's only dealing with their problems instead of going over ground they've already covered before. It also means more time for all important practice and feedback on it. Here's where we disagree there. I see your point. However, we have to consider the problems that would cause. So in essence, you're doing a test, teach, test model because you're testing, you're not sure, but you have a feeling that students might know some of these lexical items. Great. So instead of going right into language clarification, the teach stage, you're going to test them first by giving them an activity. Fine, you can certainly do that. So you give them an activity, they struggle their way through it, you address the problems in the second stage of the teach phase, and then you go through and you test them again and you give them some more freer practice type of activities so that they're using it in a more fluent and accurate, they're personalizing the language that you've given them. That's fine. That's a fine way of going about it, but that's also not the only way. And here's why. You have to take into consideration that some students panic when they're tested. And some students are just very adverse to ambiguity, very adverse to ambiguity, and they don't like not feeling confident. How many of us in private teaching have had students that said, "Teacher, can you please send me the materials before class because I'd like to look over it." If they actually look over it or not, that is a whole nother question. But there's many students that I've had that like to see where they're going. They like to see things beforehand because they feel more confident in performing. This is the only thing that I think we agree on. But I think probably, I mean, she wrote an article, she's a blog post, right? So like probably if you had a conversation with Sandy, I'm assuming that she would probably change her tone, you know what I mean? Like she would also understand this perspective as well, that when we use certain techniques and we get real good at them, and we get really efficient at them, then language clarification stages of 8 words can take me 8 minutes, if not less. I can do a word a minute. I can clarify meaning, form, and pronunciation, like just because I've been doing it for years and I got good at it. And I'm very targeted with, CCQs or clarifying language through pictures, through stories, through other things. And I also disagreed that when she said isolated items, when you're giving isolated items, it's decontextualized because you can introduce items through storytelling. So if you consider, and I'm not trying to fight here, I'm just saying TTT is a great way to check to see what they don't know, just so you can clarify that and move on. But you have an inkling that maybe they've already seen some things. That's fine. That's a great staging of lessons. And I haven't gone through all of her blogs to see if she's updated her opinion on any of this or made any comments. So I'm just taking this blog post at face value, right? But there's also an interesting and I think valuable perspective of saying, well, some students might not react to that the way that you anticipate that they react to it. And so perhaps before just going right into delivering language that way with a TTT style staging, PPP is more comfortable for some people. And here's my recommendation for private teachers and even teachers who are going through CELTA, but in CELTA you might not get the chance to do this because you have 8 TPs, maximum 10 TPs. You're teaching like 45 minutes, that type of thing. And you get assigned your focus and you don't really have a lot of control over it. But here's my recommendation for people if they think, well, I would like to get to the TTT, what she's described here. But I'm not sure how my students are going to react to it. Baby step it. Like anything else, you got to kind of warm the students up to it. You got to baby step them in. What I would do is I would start with PPP. So, right, like we're going to give you the language before you do any of the practice activities to kind of build your confidence. Now, I do disagree with her saying that it's like separate and isolated, and no. I personally like to do a little bit of storytelling. So here's the scenario. We have a nice little lead in. Here's it in context. And then I tell a story and I'm eliciting during the story to get people to see if they know the target language or not. And if they do, great, I can go even faster. But if they don't, it usually takes me about a minute, max a minute and a half to clarify individual lexical items, or maybe like 2 minutes to go through some sort of grammatical point. Then you can move on. So PPP, great. Then try guided discovery. Why? Guided discovery, in my mind, and I could be wrong, guided discovery when you're clarifying language is like the interim for me, because students are working independently through a guided discovery form or series of questions or slides or however you had it set up, and they're being forced to do something that was normally digested for them and presented for them, but now they're having to investigate a little bit more and be slight like critical analysis, right? So they kind of have to look at it and be like, okay, I think it's this, I think it's that. They're looking at the models of the sentences and things like that, and they're trying to figure out the language. And then once they kind of get the hang of that and it's not, as traumatic, then I would say you could go to like a TTT, because then if they don't know the word, they have a little bit of those critical thinking skills from doing guided discovery that they might be able to say, well, context clues lead me to believe that this is that, and this one matches this one, and blah, blah, blah. And it's, again, this is not the only way, but this is the way that I tend to try to get people to get to that TTT method, where they're having to figure it out kind of on their own, and then you're just, clarifying what they don't know. But sometimes when people are tested initially, because we never know, this is like, unless you've been with the student, excuse me, for years, and you know exactly what this person has seen, and you know exactly what this person has, absorbed, and all of the lexical items in their repertoire, everything about this student because they've been with you for a really long time, or because, I don't know, you're just overly familiar with the student and their experience, then sure, TTT might work. But I know that my students come up with a bunch of stuff. I'm like, where did you get that? Like, where did that come from? Like, oh, I saw it. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. So then that is this, and you can use it in this scenario, blah, blah, blah. But some students get real freaked out if you give them an exercise and they say, I don't know any of these. Real freaked out by it. And I've had that experience in class. I'm like, oh, great. Let me try this, a decade ago. Oh, this is so cool. I'm going to try, I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to switch it up. It's going to be great. It's going to be super dynamic. And students got frustrated. Some students. Some other students loved it. So you never know. I would just say that if you're teaching someone and it's in your classroom, that this is great advice for someone that you determine might be ready to go in that direction. Some other students, you might have to kind of hold their hand a little bit to get to that point where they feel okay guessing, because they're not adverse to ambiguity. They're okay with not knowing things. They're okay with making mistakes. And there's just some students who are not okay with that yet. So there was just one little point of contention, but I think probably, again, she's limited by a post online. So I would imagine that if I had a chat with Sandy, that we would align, perhaps, who knows. But I think was an interesting article. It was nice. It was nice to read, perspectives from other people that are doing similar things. So I'll put it into the episode notes, and that's going to be it for me on this episode. And I see you all some other time. That's it. See you later.